like I'm not doing this to be the hero, right? Like, oh, to get like status and power. I really think that I'm doing this for my own sanity, for my own like to like myself. I feel like it's the most selfless kind of selfishness. But that to me is true. So but I feel like serving is a really great, good way to kind of be happy with yourself.
Welcome everyone to the very first episode of Insight Out, a podcast that we at Give.do are hosting, where we hope to bring you stories about change, stories about change makers and community in India. We will start off today with our very first guest, Anish Malpani. We will talk about Without. Anish is currently, like I mentioned, building a social enterprise in Pune, which is called Without. Without upcycles what are commonly known as impossible to recycle plastic waste into sunglasses with their patented technology, while also empowering waste makers out of poverty. Anish has over 12 years of experience in finance, operations data, and the social impact space across the world, honestly. He's currently an Acumen Fellow in 2025, a Global Good Fund Fellow in 2025, and also on the nonprofit board of Carpe Ecosatwa. So Anish studied finance, sports management in Texas. He's worked in corporate America for 5 years. He's done a graduate certificate in social innovation from the Anmani Institute in Kenya, and also done a data science immersive course from the General Assembly in UK. He has a list of awards and fellowships that he's very deservedly won. He also won the Circular Design Challenge in 2023, which is India's leading sustainability award. Thank you so much for joining us today, Anish. Hope to have a good conversation with you over the next 1 hour. So I'll
And for
just
that
dive.
really, really kind introduction. That was really nice.
I mean, as soon as I sort of saw what all you've done, I decided, okay, this is going to be a long introduction. You have accomplished some wonderful stuff. So really glad to be talking with you and hopefully learning from you today. I'll just dive right into it. I think one thing that really stands out to me, like I went through your website quite a bit and I've seen your interviews. One thing that you constantly talk about is to use profit for good, that you want to do social capitalism, inclusive capitalism, whatever it is called. There are multiple names that multiple people address it by. So how did that thought process start for you?
I think we have to go back to when I was in New York working in corporate America. I was working in finance
Hmm.
and I was in the greatest city in the world. And I thought I had it all. I had this great job. They had applied for my green card. I had this nice apartment. I had a football team I was playing on.
Okay.
And at that zenith, or that supposed zenith, it kind of felt that, wait, why am I still depressed? Why am I still not happy with with this? And in that, I learned that I was extremely fortunate to do the things that I do. And I didn't really understand if working in finance and making a lot of money, making rich people richer,
Hmm.
was going to be something that I liked doing because I didn't like myself as an individual.
Sure.
And that created an idea in my head that, okay, like there has to be a better version of this. There's so much unfairness in this world. And then my sister introduced this book to me called The Blue Sweater by Jacqueline Novogratz, the founder of Acumen. And that it was a very seminal book for me because it changed it gave me something that was like, oh, this is so interesting. How do you play by the rules of the markets we're in, but use that to do good? So how do you use capitalism for good?
Hmm.
And is that where capitalism needs to head? And is there a model that exists? So they were like seeds of the model. And then
Sure.
I spent like 4 or 5 years researching that
Hmm.
space before starting without. But I think that was a really pivotal moment where I thought I had it all, but it didn't make any sense.
Sure. I mean, I get that, right? Like we do everything which has been repeated to us so many times that we believe that is the natural way to succeed or like be happy in life, and it can still feel empty even after accomplishing everything that you set out. That's really introspective. So when this is a story, honestly, that we've heard one or two times before, right? Like people living in like great cities and doing well, and then coming back to India because there's still some fire within them that is still burning, that they still want to achieve. The two most common routes that at least I've personally seen, one is they either build a startup and become one of the biggest companies, or two is they start a non-profit or they join the non-profit development sector and they work there and try to get like a job that has direct impact. I feel you've somehow like been in the middle of both. You haven't directly gone into like a development sector or try to start a non-profit, and it's not just like building like the biggest company for you. It's building a successful company that creates maximum impact of what you can do. So how did that thought process come about, trying to bridge both of that, like not a startup and not non-profits, but in between both?
That's a really good question. So when I when I was quitting my main job, I was like, okay, now the world is my oyster.
Yeah.
I can do anything. I can start anywhere, and I want to make change happen.
Mhm.
And I came across this a concept of like how do you maximize your impact with the resources that you have. And after reading a bunch of books, attending a bunch of conferences, came to realize that you want to be in a place where you're applying first principles to solving real problems, not just top of the pyramid AI problems and
Mhm.
going to mass
Yeah.
problems, but like, hey, human problems, system problems, unfairness. How do you solve that? And the non-profit model does many things well, but has issues. The for-profit model also does many things well. It's, their people are very streamlined and optimized to
Yeah.
maximize profit, and
Mhm.
operations are really, really important. So then became like, okay, how can I rethink everything, right? Like, because I felt like I went through this renaissance, all
Mhm.
assumptions were kind of thrown out the window. Um, but the goal was to maximize your probability of making impact with the resources that you have, minimize the probability of failure, or maximize the impact you want to make. And if
Sure.
you look at it from that lens, you have to take into consideration the size of the problem you're dealing with, but also where you come from. So
Yes.
I only had lived 9 years in India before returning back to India. I'd spent more than 2 decades outside of India. So I also questioned whether I was Indian and how Indian am I, and
Mhm.
is that even a thing?
Sure.
But I did know that I was more Indian than I was anything else. And I think that's what motivated me to come back to India, was because I felt like the probability of you're trying to, it's all a probability game, right?
Yeah.
Whether you're working in impact, whether you're working in startups, you're trying to minimize the probability of failure.
Yeah.
And then I was like, no, I want to create financially viable business models
Mhm.
that can center around solving problems. So
Sure.
we're not using profit for good. That's not the way I would frame it, right?
Mhm.
Profit for me is just a tool to maximize impact.
Perfect.
That is more independent than, let's say, donations,
Yeah.
which require a lot more sympathy, and sympathy is very hard to scale.
Sure.
So yeah, I think that's why it felt like, we try, even today, like we try to make decisions based on like, hey, what is required, right? Like, and what model works best. Is there
Sure.
a model that exists? Great. If it doesn't exist, can we adapt, morph, and create
Yeah.
it on our own?
That's beautiful. And I totally get that. I mean, we are a fundraising platform. We've firsthand seen issues with not being able to scale just through donations and it after a while getting stuck. So that's a beautiful way to think about it. I really enjoyed. And I think one of the things that stood out to me in your journey from what I learned is that a lot of people have a lot of thoughts about changing India or changing the world or changing my community or changing my city for the better. But you didn't decide on it one day and then start to build something 2 weeks, 3 weeks later. You went through a very meticulous journey trying to understand how to do that, what will work in different scenarios, what is specific to the Indian context. Can you give me a little more insight into that journey?
Yes. Thank you for that question. So when I was quitting, obviously don't quit overnight. And I feel like all my life I've taken calculated risks. I think that's really important. But while quitting and I knowing that I want to, do something more meaningful, I didn't want to kid myself. Like, I was this kid from New York who didn't know anything about impact.
Mhm.
So what gave me the right to come to India and do change, right? And I didn't want to be that guy who thinks he knows everything I don't. So after quitting, before coming to India, I spent 3 years working in different parts of the world, developing world, with social entrepreneurs, with nonprofits, being like, look, I have a skill I can offer. Finance is pretty languageless in many ways.
Mhm.
And, I will give you the skill for free. I just want to learn about the space. So I
Mhm.
spent I was supposed to spend 6 months in Central America in Guatemala working for a nonprofit there. Ended up spending 18 months with
Oh,
this
okay.
nonprofit called Alterna
Mhm.
that essentially incubates and accelerates and cultivates social enterprises in Guatemala.
Got.
So it became a really good way for me to have a macro, yet like on the field view of
Sure.
a
Mm-hmm.
country like Guatemala,
Mm-hmm.
which is has its own problems.
Yeah.
Then I was like, I have to spend time in sub-Saharan Africa because statistically, there's a lot of issues there, and where there's a lot of issues, a lot of good work is happening as well. So I spent half a year in Nairobi working with a local social enterprise.
Mm-hmm.
Worked with just one social enterprise, and I went there through the Amani program.
Okay.
Um, and I just worked with one social enterprise, but went deeper. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that helped me get a better understanding of the space. So before I came to India, I felt like I got the impact space from first-hand experiences, from
Mm-hmm.
long chunks of time, right? Not a 2 month, 1 month internship, long periods of time. And so before I came to India, I was like, okay, I get the impact space. I still don't know if I get India because it's been, so long
No.
and I haven't really lived here. But I get the impact space and I don't and because the other thing was, Akash, was that once I came to India, the goal is not to leave. Change doesn't happen in 2 weeks or 2 years. It takes
Mm-hmm.
2 centuries or 2 decades or more, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this is very much for the rest of my life.
Sure.
And so yeah, so when I came to India, then I spent like a year researching the impact space in India. And
Mm-hmm.
so I came in December 2019, and then in March 2020, COVID happened. And I mean, it sounds really bad when I say it, but I was lucky in the sense that this was a great time for me to understand India. I had time available and I was like, I'm willing to volunteer and just what can I do to help? And while trying to be a part of that, I learned a lot about how India works. India was going through a
Yeah.
significant event with all of the things that happened in COVID.
Mm-hmm.
And that also gave me a bit of an understanding. And then I came across the waste management space, read a bunch of books, talked
Sure.
to a bunch of people, then
Mm-hmm.
volunteered to work in the waste management space for 3 months with Kapi Ecosatva and then started without, right? So this was like a 4 year journey, 3 to 4 years of just trying to understand the space before starting out, which at that point you feel like an imposter, right? You're like, oh, I'm just delaying this.
Yeah.
I'm finding excuses to
Mm-hmm.
not start. Or some people might say that. But like now, 5 years after that journey, so it's been like 9 years since I
Sure.
quit. I feel like some of the lessons I've learned have been very helpful and crucial, and everything is kind of out of my system where my motivation is very high to work on
Mm-hmm.
this. But I will truly find out if those decisions I made were correct or not in the next 6 to 12 months, I think,
Oh,
because the
wow.
most important 6 to 12 months of Without's life are coming, where we try to figure out the final jigsaw in this puzzle, at least from a philosophy perspective.
Okay, I mean, I think from all of us, we all hope that these 12 months go very successfully for you. And I think that's a very important lesson for anyone who wants to. I think we're at an age of like very instant happiness or gratification or impact or building to the top, where you just spent 4 years not even starting, not even thinking about starting, but just trying to understand the space and how your skills could match to that space. That was a beautiful journey. It felt very happy to just listen to you say that. So thank you for sharing that. So I think a couple of things that Without does at the moment. Number one is the recyclable part of it, where from chips packets, which are very rarely considered recyclable or almost never considered recyclable, turn it into products. And number two is also giving livelihood or improving the livelihood for waste pickers. Did those two sort of start simultaneously in your mind, or did one start and the other sort of fit into the puzzle as you built?
Yeah, so here it's a bit flipped for me actually than most
Mhm.
waste entrepreneurs, but um, my burning was around unfairness. I think there is
Mhm.
unfairness in this world, man-made unfairness, and how can you reduce man-made injustice as much as possible?
Mhm.
And I think one of the biggest man-made injustices or unfairness is poverty.
Sure.
So I was researching the poverty space. And while I was researching the poverty space, I came across the waste picker issue where I found these 4 million, there are about 1.5 to 4 million waste pickers
Mhm.
that live really poor lives. And then I was like, wait, but this is so much more complex than just that. You have like 50 to 80% of the waste in India ends up in landfills or in the oceans. So not only is there an environmental issue, but there's like economic resource, there's value in waste.
Yeah.
So I'm like, there's a bunch of poor people who are trying to make the waste space a little better, not because they want to, but because it's a livelihood for them. And then you have it's an environmental issue and there's an economic issue. So the complexity of the problem really interested me. And the second thing, I felt like I could be like, look, if there's value in this waste, how do we make the waste more valuable and
Sure.
use that value to kind of get these waste pickers that are enabling it to to get out of poverty. So just the puzzle, the pieces of the puzzle started to come together. So from the beginning, we've been both, right? And so when I researched the waste space, I found that the problem. See, there are a bunch of nonprofits working on waste picker
Sure.
empowerment and
Mm-hmm.
collectives, which are doing great work. There are a
Mm-hmm.
bunch of recyclers who are working on recycling technology as well.
Mm-hmm.
But they all have very different incentives. The nonprofits really care about because the recyclers care about making money, which is nothing wrong with making money by recycling
Oh,
waste. It's a
sure.
good way to do it. But your incentive is not to necessarily solve the problem as much. You'll
Mm-hmm.
happily jump on that bandwagon, but it's not necessarily the reason to exist. But we wanted to solve problems at scale. I didn't want to really just focus on all of that. So
Yeah.
waste pickup is again issues. When I researched the waste space, I found that there were certain types of waste that nobody wanted to touch, and
Mm-hmm.
nobody wanted to talk about because they were so hard to recycle, and
Sure.
nobody had a solution. Manufacturers
Mm-hmm.
want to talk about it. Recyclers were not talking about it because they had no solutions. The collectors, I mean, the scrap shop owners were like, I mean, we don't do anything with this.
Mm-hmm.
So it became the black sheep. And then the thesis that came to us was that if you fundamentally increase the economic value of unrecyclable waste, let me say that again. If you fundamentally increase the economic value of unrecyclable or hard to recycle waste, then all of the incentives around align. There's a reason to collect it. There's a
Sure.
reason to talk about it. And we felt like technology was the only way, was one of the most important ways to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And then obviously from the beginning we cared about these waste pickers that we would be, like they are
Working with. Mm-hmm.
they're part of this mess, right? And
Yeah.
they live off of it, and
Mm-hmm.
it's pretty shitty lives. Like I don't think they choose. I mean, they do choose waste picking over other worse occupations, but it's a poverty of choice, right? Like when your options are, Nrega or waste picking. And so that's why it became like we have to look at things holistically. You have to look at it from a social perspective, an environmental perspective, and an economic perspective. And that is the bet that I'm making. And
Sure.
I don't know if it's the right bet. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
maybe 3 years from now, 1 year from now, if we fail, maybe we're trying to do too much. The
Mm-hmm.
fact that we do so much is our biggest strength and our biggest weakness.
Sure.
So, but I still strongly believe that this is the only way. I mean, this is the way that we're betting on,
Mm-hmm.
and we'll
Mm-hmm.
find. That's why I said the next 6 to 12 months will prove or disprove a lot of hypotheses.
Sure, I get that. I think very nice way to think about. Like even I was thinking, like when you work with waste pickers, and a big part of it is also like you building trust within the community, within the people who are going to be working with you, and it's obviously pretty hard for them to be able to easily trust people because the system or whatever has let them down constantly, and it's not easy for them to trust that people have good intentions towards them. How easy or difficult was that journey trying to get them on board and believe in your vision?
Yeah, so very good question. And there's a lot of fresh ideas that have come up to
Mm-hmm.
things that I've learned recently. So when I first started working on this, we were like waste pickers. They're these people, they have one identity. You kind of book them,
Sure.
you kind of call them waste
Mm-hmm.
pickers.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're like, there's a number 1.5 to 4, what a wide range. But then when I was diving deeper, even in the beginning, there's no like nobody has a good estimate of how many waste pickers in India there are.
Oh.
And I'm like, why is that? Like, and this based on one random study done by somebody ages ago, based on the Delhi sample size, and then looking at, okay, oh, maybe all the urban population is this. So if you assume X%, then, and then you're like, wait a minute, like, is that really the case? The census does not have a waste picking as an occupation thing.
I see.
So
Mm-hmm.
what we've learned is that this idea of waste picking is very or waste pickers is wrong, because a waste picker is so much more than just a waste picker, not just philosophically, right? Obviously they're a human being and all of
Yeah.
that, but
Mm-hmm.
if you work as an informal worker, you're doing many jobs. There's an excellent book called Saida X that I recommend to anybody who wants to read about informal work. But like Saida X in the book talks about how she had 50 jobs over the course of like her life.
Sure.
One of them was waste picking, and then when we talk to our former waste pickers who are now working in our at Without,
Mm-hmm.
they did a bunch of jobs, right? They did waste picking, they did bottle caps, like bottling things. They did house sweeping. Sometimes some polishing was required. They would go there. Somebody wants to babysit somebody. They'll go do that. There are also a lot of voodoo applicate like voodoo like dark occupations that they like
Mm-hmm.
that are done as well, because
Yeah.
it's very like money is money,
They
right?
have to make ends meet.
So
Yeah.
so we have to really think about it as not just waste pickers, because there's so much more than like there's like so much dimensions to it, right?
Sure.
And so I think we're also, as we're rethinking how best to frame all of this, we think that the urban poor is our like is the right angle to look at. Like, it's the right
Mm-hmm.
definition. And the second thing is that unfortunately, waste picking as an occupation is a catch-all. So if you come as a migrant worker, let's say from the farm to the city, looking for jobs,
Mm-hmm.
the first, you come with hope, but you don't necessarily find a job, then you end up becoming a waste picker because there's very low barriers to entry. You just kind of find waste. You'll find some scrap dealer who'll give you some money for it. So it becomes a catch-all for the poor as well. So yeah, I think so that's first of all very interesting to know, because I think people don't know that. I didn't know that when I started
Correct.
off. I thought of
Correct.
them as this one bucket of folks. And then over the last 4 or 5 years, we've learned so much about like it's like it sounds all cliche when I say this, but I mean, they're just like you and I. They have
I'm
the
sure.
same, they all have problems, they all have strengths, they're all different. Some people can read, some people can write. Some people who can't read are more motivated and work harder. Some people who can read are growing much faster. Some people have a lot of ambition, some people don't have ambition. Some people are
Mm-hmm.
good at work, some people are bad at work, some people create drama. So it's just a part of the equation. They just
Sure.
have gotten a set of cards, like they've been dealt a hand that is just not as lucky, let's say, as I have, or maybe you have.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
And so, which doesn't make them gods or devils. They're just one of us. And even our goal is not to be like, hey, let's make them better waste pickers. Let's make them better humans. Like, I want to give them
Sure.
agency, I want to give them choice, I want to give
Yeah.
them dignity.
Mm-hmm.
So I think to answer your question, I know it's super long, but I'll close out with
No, no,
that.
I'm glad you
Is
gave.
that
Yeah.
is that um, you know, the first person we hired,
Mm-hmm.
what we did was one of the sweepers was working with us. We formalized her, so
Okay.
we had an entry point into the equation. She's trusted us.
Mm-hmm.
Her name is Jayashri. She still works with us.
Oh, wow. Okay.
3 4 years later, she used to make 3,000 4,000 rupees a month. Then she started working with us part time, and we didn't hire her full time. We kept
Mm-hmm.
her part time because we're like, we don't know if we're gonna be a big company,
Yeah.
so don't know. Keep
Mm-hmm.
doing your other jobs as well. We eventually converted her into full time. When she reached that point, we gave her banking access. She can't read and write in
Mm-hmm.
English or Hindi. She knows Kannada, but even that not very well. So I think when she was brought on board, then we also got other former waste pickers. So we work with this organization called Swatch, which is a waste picker
Okay.
collective in India. We
Mm-hmm.
call
Yeah.
them. We're like, listen, you're already doing amazing work. We're looking to hire some folks. Can you recommend people for us in need and with some basic ability, let's say, of like some of the work that we're
Sure.
picking up things, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they used to send us some folks as well.
Okay.
But the first ones, when they we started to like first people they started to hire, we were like so fair to them, which
Mm-hmm.
fairness to them came off as kindness, because we were like, oh no, we'll pay you on time. Oh no, we will give you rights. We'll give you this. We'll give you that. They were like, we can use the same bathroom as you. Are you sure we can use the same bathroom as you? And so they felt
Okay.
extremely. First, they came like, this is they're being too nice. They must have some ulterior motives. But
Yeah.
that went away really quickly because they saw, and then it became then became really easy, Akash. Like
Mm-hmm.
everybody now it's the opposite, where people want they want their whole family to work with us.
Work.
We disagree with. I mean, we don't let that happen. And it's not. And it's so there's a sadness to that,
Yeah.
because the bar is so low,
Mm.
and they're like, oh, Anish, we get paid on time, we love working here. I'm like, but that's not a big deal. Getting paid on
Mm-hmm.
time cannot be a big deal. So yeah, it's not been hard. I mean, there's other issues that you have because of they've never worked anywhere before, so
Mm.
professionalization,
Sure.
etc.
Mm-hmm.
So there's some concerns over there, but that also, if you're fair to them, they get it. Like, but it's just it's like but it's not different from a fresher that we get
I
from
was
a
going to
business
say,
school,
yeah.
right? Like who's like never worked before and is like,
Yeah.
oh, and like our Gen Zs are very entitled these days,
Yeah.
right? So it's very interesting. Like when you talk about diversity, our workplace is extremely diverse. We have
Okay.
former waste pickers and Gen Z, like
Mhm.
and we have like engineers and scientists and development people and like sales people. It's a really interesting mix of folks.
That's very cool actually. And I mean, I have like few anecdotes that I can think of as soon as you said. Like I remembered like my cook who comes here, like she has to come up 2 floors because we don't have a lift. It's a standalone apartment. And then she was gasping for breath, and I said, like, just sit on the sofa like for 5 minutes and then you can start. And it was nothing. Like I never thought of it like for a second time. And but she was pretty emotional. She said nobody has ever let me sit on like the sofa in their house. And I get it that it's the bare minimum. It's not even the bare minimum, I would say. But unfortunately, they've been dealt or like used to a system where they don't even get that. So it can feel great to them. But thank you. I was actually going to ask you next if you had any success story that you would like to share, but you already did in that story. So I was very happy to hear that too. So in terms of like success, like or for you, like metrics that you track outside of like products and selling. So do you also keep like how many people are we able to employ from the community and sort of what has their growth been from when they started to where they are now? Or these also crucial metrics for you to look at and say like because that is the significant part or like a very important part of what you do also. I just want to try to understand like do you also measure impact in that way in terms of okay like we've been able to employ these many people, these people they're earning this much more after working with us and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, we measure everything, right? I'm
Sure.
a finance guy, data guy, so we measure everything.
I'm sure.
So the waste part is sometimes easier because it's like, kilos of waste or
Yeah.
tons of waste recycled.
Mm-hmm.
But we also like to not do extrapolations like, okay, this waste recycle means how much carbon avoided and all of that. Like, it's just like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, you know what? Those are all based on assumptions. And sure. Um, on the people side of things, it's a bit more complex because the way we look at poverty, we look at it from a multidimensional lens.
Sure.
So our measure is on multidimensional poverty, which looks at health, education, access to income, livelihoods,
Mm-hmm.
and also dignity. So it becomes much more complex.
Sure.
Um, and we look at things at a much deeper level. We also look at things like employability after, with preventive healthcare. So yes, we do measure that impact. We also focus on depth, not breadth.
Sure.
So at least for starting in the starting space. So like for instance, we've impacted when we have 17 former waste pickers who work with us now, who we've graduated out of poverty. And this doesn't, I know donors, traditional donors are a bit like bus. And then you're like, listen, with the same amount of money we've spent on these 17 folks, we could
Mm-hmm.
have literally trained 1,000, 5,000 people and given them 5-day training courses on how to use a computer. And it wouldn't have changed a goddamn thing.
Mm-hmm.
So, but we are incentivized to kind of talk about those big numbers. Whereas we are like, no, our bet is let's go deep and then let's scale that depth. I'm not happy with just impacting 17 people,
Yeah.
but I don't want to have superficial impact on 100,000 people and make myself feel like, oh, wow, look, itna acha kaam hua hai. So I think that honesty is really important as well. And we're trying to be smarter in the way we communicate that because I think people understand it when you say it, but they don't have the patience for it sometimes.
No.
So we do measure that, and yeah, I mean, and we are starting, we're focusing more on how to impact. So impact not just the individuals who work here, but the
Mm-hmm.
communities they come from. So I think I don't know why in the impact space, like the individual or the household has become so important.
Yeah.
Um, I really think if you look at things from a community perspective, especially, and then how resilient is the community that is dominated by, let's say, waste pickers, again, not waste pickers, like informal workers, right?
Sure.
Informal worker dominated communities are generally poor. There's a reason why that exists. They're generally slum dwellings. And our interventions are going to be like, how do you have multiple interventions, like health interventions, finance interventions, like micro savings and micro loans,
Sure. Mm-hmm.
and like hak darshak, like getting them access to their basic rights from the government and their rations and their OBC statuses, and like maybe sports and psychology, and how can you have all of these interventions hit the community? And then how do you measure community resilience?
Sure.
Because you're not going to be able to employ everybody in the community.
Of course.
And that's also not going to be reasonable. But if the community is stronger, yes, they fight amongst them each themselves, but they also look out for each other. There's a lot of like, there's a lot of like togetherness. And we are going to start looking at that as our unit. Like, how is the community doing? How resilient is the community? What is the economic stimulus in the community going to be like? So, yes, to answer that question, we do a lot of measurement. We measure everything.
No, and I think it was a very crucial answer that you gave that I'm really glad I asked that question. Because like you say, a lot of incentive is based on we did this for 5,000 kids, we did this for 5,000 families, and those interventions end up being something that might make the kids happy or make the families happy for a week or for a month, but doesn't really break the cycle of getting them out of poverty. And that's a constant problem with like the impact space. I do agree, and I'm glad that you look at it from a multidimensional way as well.
And
Uh,
Akash, just to add that, and here's the
yeah.
irony, right?
Hmm.
Imagine, I think we do a lot. We go above and beyond for our 17 folks, and we are still not convinced if we're breaking the cycle of poverty fully.
Hmm.
Like we're still not convinced, and obviously they're better off, etc. So imagine those small interventions, right? Like who are we lying to here,
Yeah.
right? Like why are incentives? And I think there is, and I don't blame these nonprofits. Like they're not, I mean, I think, it's everyone is coming into this space with the right intention and right heart. Most people are,
Sure.
but it is so complex. And one thing I'll say, because you've got me all riled up on this, is
No,
that
no, of course.
I think there's so much focus on um, hustle,
Hmm.
and in the startup world, like in Silicon Valley or in Bangalore, where you're like, oh, work hard, work your
Yeah.
socks off. You're solving, like, you're making the next AI agent, or the next LLM, or the next,
Sure.
like, thing that goes to Mars. And it's almost like seen as a strength if you work really hard and burn yourself out and stress out. And then, but that's very much, as you were saying, a top of the pyramid problem,
Yeah.
which is not
Mhm.
not important, but it
Mhm.
is it is a top of the pyramid. The bottom of the pyramid is a different ball game as well. And why are we not like working extraordinarily hard to solve those problems? Why are we not, like, being burnt out? And I mean, if anything, we should be burnt out for solving these problems, not like, top of the pyramid problems as much, I would think.
Sure.
And why are we not holding these organizations accountable more? Like, are you how can we, why is it okay for, these interventions to not work? And just goodwill isn't enough. So I feel like that. Sometimes I feel like the work that we're doing is very hard because you're trying to change systems and people are messy and systems are messy.
Sure.
And it is not sexy. Making AI agents are sexy, like that's cool.
I'm sure.
And so yeah, it's sometimes it's hard. It's super hard. It's maybe sometimes it's as hard as building a new LLM, right?
Yeah.
Maybe even harder, if I would argue, but I leave that for people's discretion.
No, and I mean, grateful, at least me personally, and I'm sure a lot more people are grateful for the people taking up this work with as much seriousness or as much, because I mean, at least the general impression, because we started this rant, I'll also like add in a little bit, is that somehow like the non-profit space in itself becomes like a way for like people to like finish their careers at 40, 45, do all the hard work, and then come like for like a little more relaxing, not as hectic work. And I get that it's because of what you said, right? Because your prime years are supposed to be making value for your shareholders, for your companies. And then once you've made enough money to retire, then you can afford to like take on your passion projects or care about the world. And I don't know. I fundamentally disagree. Like when you discuss economic systems and stuff, a lot of people say, but people are motivated by profit. And in fact, I would say it's not really the case. I would say people are motivated by helping or like changing other people's lives a lot more than people are motivated by profit from what I've seen. Like, and it's not even like a select few who care about the world or whatever. A general lay person who I'd go talk to, if you'd rather put in all your sweat and effort so like five families can live better or so you can get richer, I think the natural answer will be for five people, five families to get better. But I do agree that we live in a world where you need to have money, you need to have a lot of things depend on you, a lot of money that you need to make. So like you said, for the non-profits also, the funders, I wouldn't blame the non-profits either, because the donors want to see 5,000 families effective, 5,000 families changed, not 17 families brought out of multidimensional poverty. For the donors, they want to type on their report that we, through our money, 5,000 families were changed. So it's a cycle that has to break. I hope that it does, and that there is more meaningful bringing people out of systems as opposed to um, work that feels good but isn't really as impactful. I'm glad that you brought that up. Cool. So, but with respect to doing everything that you said, like one side of it is that the non-profit is impact is very differently measured and calculated, and the other side is that a lot of the companies that maybe say working in similar spaces as you, either with respect to waste management, recycling, or even with respect to say, like, I know you make sunglasses as a product for now, other companies making sunglasses, they don't have this burden, is a word I'll use right now, to care about like the work they do and the people they employ in the way that you do. So I would think of it as a pretty significant disadvantage that you start with, because it's not what is most economically great. Like your costs, I'm sure, are higher because you choose to do take up these products, and that you choose to like pay people very respectfully, involve them respectfully, and that is a challenge that you are taking. How has that been competing with, or I don't know how many competitors in the sense you have, but you do have to eventually compete against companies that don't really have the same obligations. So how has that been for you?
Yeah, again, an excellent question.
Mhm.
We've recently come up with, I've been able to frame this recently.
Sure.
And we try to call it the economic gap of impact,
Mhm.
which is what you said, right? The manufacturing costs for and the operational costs for what we
Mhm.
do, which is, recycle the hardest waste and using technology that doesn't exist, that we're creating ourselves. Paying fair wages, not market wages, not minimum wage,
Sure.
paying what we think is fair, which turns out to be at least two times more than
I'm sure.
what everybody else pays,
Mhm.
is a burden, quote unquote, right?
Yeah.
But I see it as an obligation, not as a
Mhm.
burden.
Mhm.
And the challenge that we're given ourselves is that, so there's this gap, right? A competitor doesn't have to do all of these things. They can
Yes.
do bare minimum things and still be like respected. Like, look, we are
Mhm.
formalizing them, we're giving them some benefits, but we're not going to pay them two times. That's like doesn't make
Sure.
any sense. Um, there are four ways we we are trying to close this gap.
Okay.
The first is insane amount of investment in time in technology.
Mhm.
Because what is technology for? Try to make things easier, faster, better, for things that nobody else can recycle. Um, so technology helps make us smarter and increase the value of the waste that we want to
Mhm.
create. Number two is operational prowess. And this is what I tell my team as well. I'm like, guys, we have to be operationally more efficient than the best for profits, because we are really competing. There's no
Yeah.
room for any operational
Mhm.
fat.
Mhm.
So we're constantly trying to challenge ourselves, like, how can we be operationally excellent?
Mhm.
Um, which is like very underrated
Sure.
in business. Number three is brand. How do you use the good work that you're doing to get people to join your journey? Because, and like this is not gonna we're not gonna be able to do this by ourselves. We need people like you guys,
Sure.
um, for profits, non-profits, governments, to all of us need to band together to kind of
Yeah.
try and make the change happen.
Mhm.
So like, how do you build the brand to kind of, like for instance, even for our products and our materials, you would probably pay more for a Nike pair of Nike shoes for like a Bata
Sure.
shoes, right? Um, and so like brand helps. So like, investing in marketing, investing in some sort of like building of,
Yeah. Yeah.
reputation is important. And the fourth thing, is goodwill. And this is a weird one where it's like, yes, it's like people who have invested in us as true impact investors, not expecting returns in the short run.
Mhm.
People who've taken pay cuts to work for us. I mean,
Yeah.
we don't tell anyone to take pay cuts. If they take pay cuts, it's on their own
On
volition.
there.
It's their choice.
Mhm.
We don't force that. People who are volunteering, advising, guiding, most of them are doing it for free. um, you know, all of that helps us close the gap.
Sure.
And we don't see this as a permanent thing that we need all the time.
Mhm.
Goodwill has to help us close the gap so we can become more, we can close this like, burden or this obligation that we have, because that is the elephant in the room in the
Of
nonprofit
course.
space, right? If you want to do good work, it is it costs more money. And
Yeah.
are we willing to talk about that? Oh, because I have non-negotiables. I'm not going to
Yeah.
pay people badly. I'm not going to
Mm-hmm.
work on like problems that don't exist.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and yeah, and I think that's when I say like the next 6 to 12 months are the most crucial. Is that we're trying to we have a path to figuring that last piece out,
Sure.
and we will find out in 6 to 12 months how close we can get, or what are the probabilities that we can actually compete. And then this becomes a case study, Akash. I really hope, or a
Mm-hmm.
template, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
look, you can evolve capitalism to be something that looks at people and planet first. And I feel like there is quote unquote economic value creation that will happen in the long run,
Of
because if you
course.
look at any of the best organizations that
Mm-hmm.
have been built because of an investment in people, have been built because they're solving actual hard problems,
Yeah.
but it just takes much longer. And what is, like, if you talk to even the Bezos of the world, Jeff
Mm-hmm.
Bezoses of the world, they look for missionary founders, right? And missionary founders can be different kinds, but if you're working in the impact space, your mission is more towards, solving like environmental or social
Yeah.
or economic problems.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, man, I think it's a very good question. We have a hypothesis on be able to solve it, on how we can solve it, but it's a really, 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 that's the hard part.
Yeah, I mean, without a doubt, as soon as I first learned about what your company does, this is the first question that came to my mind, and I'm sure it's the most crucial question that you deal with every single day as well. Like it's always on your mind. I have no doubts about that. And just touching upon this, and I also want to, of course, ask you about Shark Tank because a lot of colleagues in my company, when I introduced you, I said, "Oh, have you seen Shark Tank?" I shared the Shark Tank episode with them. So on Shark Tank US, funnily, I've seen a lot of products that come up with a social cause. And a lot of the sharks say this adds a lot of value to your business because it makes your business stand out. That millennials or like younger people really do care about having a social cause. So you would see like every season you would see at least 7 to 10 products that are very socially minded and think of capitalism or companies in the way that you do. However, I don't know if it's just a me thing. I haven't seen as much in Indian Shark Tank, and I do know there is a difference because obviously the purchasing power for the majority is very different in the US and in India. Not a lot of people in India can afford to like pay a premium, and a lot of us are just trying to get by. So is that something that you've thought about or has affected your working in any way?
Yeah, lots of thoughts when you ask that question.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Firstly, I think you're right in your assumption that, look, purchasing power, etc. Like it's. I think being environmentally conscious and socially conscious is a luxury.
Of
If
course.
if your house is burning, you don't give a shit. Like if somebody else's house is
Yeah.
okay.
Mm-hmm.
So I think yes, there is a more, and if there's like almost zero absolute poverty in the
Mm-hmm.
US and in the developed world. So there is generally people care a bit more. Second, I think I call them like conveniently impact brands, like convenient
Yeah.
impact, which is that, oh, we care about the product, we'll try
Yeah.
and add like some sustainable packaging, or we'll add a
Mm-hmm.
little bit of recycled material, and thoda kahani bhi ban jata hai. We also get, like, obviously we try to do our bit for the environment, but they don't exist to solve social environmental issues. They
Mm-hmm.
are definitely taking it, they're doing their small bit. But those are the kind of companies I think generally that you see
Sure.
in the US. Like
Mm-hmm.
Thomas was a classic example, where
Mm-hmm.
they were like, for every shoe that you buy, we'll
We
donate a
will
pair
donate a
to,
pair. Yeah.
and like the amount of marketing ROI he got for
They've
that
got.
was insane, right? And he did obviously donate like millions of shoes to people in different parts of the world, but nobody knows very few people know the underbelly of that.
Yeah.
Number one, it got, these initiatives didn't get executed very well. So a lot of, like, and also the local shoemaking entrepreneurs got destroyed in like sub-Saharan Africa because there was
Mm-hmm.
this free shoes being distributed. When I was in Guatemala, I worked with people who had helped Toms distribute shoes, and they're like, Anish, we used to get truckloads of shoes, with like, with the instruction to distribute. We couldn't find people to distribute them to. We should literally go around on a truck throwing shoes at random people, be like, take, 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 because there is no, how do you get people's sizes, fittings,
Mm-hmm.
this, that, then, like comfort. It's
Mm-hmm.
so much more complex than that. So, how much impact did that? those shoes have?
actually create.
And then how much impact did the brand have, like get from that, right? The brand
Mhm.
got so much goodwill, which I think was maybe probably disproportionate to the actual impact that they were
Good
having.
work that they did.
But
Mm.
look, are they the worst people in the world? No, I don't think Tom's is evil. They've tried
Yeah.
to rectify that. They're now fueling like, social media, but they don't exist to solve these problems. They're
Mm.
like, ठीक है, थोड़ा कुछ करेंगे. In India, I think it's a different sentiment, right? India, I think, I think, I mean, obviously, I'm biased because I've seen a lot of startups that are more impact first or
Yeah.
impact centric because it's my world. But I think that it's, I mean, you're right. Like it's what you said. Why the Indian Shark Tank is a bit more dhanda, dhanda, dhanda.
Mhm.
And yes, I mean, dhanda is business is one of the best ways to kind of get
Sure.
out of
Hmm.
poverty. I think one last thing I'll say about entrepreneurship and startup that I've
Yeah.
kind of changed my mind on or thought about differently. First, I'm like, we don't need any more failed entrepreneurs in this world. So I think entrepreneurship is bad. I think to don't become an entrepreneur. It's not a good thing to do. 90% of startups fail. We shouldn't celebrate that at all.
Mhm.
That's, in fact, we should discourage people. And despite discouraging people, if somebody still wants to do it, then it's a very good sign that this person should do it.
Okay.
Not like build these like pedestals, like, oh,
Yeah.
you're an entrepreneur. It's very
Mhm.
dangerous. But the flip side, like, why the government or any government, even in like Nigeria or Kenya or in Nigeria especially, and maybe in India, is like focusing on entrepreneurship is that it's an interesting way of creating jobs. If you have more entrepreneurs, it creates more jobs. It gives more hope in the city. So as if there's not enough jobs to fill people's pockets,
Mhm.
then do you encouraging entrepreneurship might make sense, even if it's
Sure.
like really risky. And
Mhm.
then you're like, you don't have to be a complex startup. Like just sell like sell like peanuts, right? Sell whatever you need to sell because we want to encourage economic activity in a
Mhm.
world that is getting, I mean, our demographic dividend is so high.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's, the sub-Saharan African case study is even worse. I mean, that's like the demographic dividend in Nigeria is insane right now. And there are repercussions of having a population that is jobless,
Don't have work.
hopeless.
Mhm.
So complex, right? Like, I mean,
Yeah.
and so what is the right thing? Be an entrepreneur, don't be an entrepreneur. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, these are tough questions. I think anyone trying to create like a significant impact in their lives, these are genuine questions that everyone, like I can think of my thought process just through what you said, like not as evolved as yours, but I have had very similar thoughts of like, okay, like what is the best way to create an impact? And then something happens, you think that's great, and then you see that in a year that falls apart, and then you're like, oh, maybe this was not the great way. Kudos that you've recognized at least. And
Yeah, and
so
we might be a sob story in 3 or 4 years, right? So we have to
yeah.
be prepared for that. Like maybe,
Yeah.
maybe, and but we'll definitely learn.
Sure. I mean, hopefully not, but yeah, I mean, it is open. It's always a possibility with like especially with
Yeah.
the situation as tough as
And
yours.
that's why you do it, right? If it was a sure
Hmm.
shot, then that would defeat the purpose, right? Like it's like
Sure.
okay, then it's like anybody can do it.
Yeah, and it would have, if it was a sure shot, someone would have attempted it or done it anyway. It is
Yeah,
because it's this stuff that you're one of the first to try and create like a sample for others to be able to do. So this,
perhaps.
yeah, I'll also do the Uh, so this mission being mission driven, or like having impact at like the forethought and not as an afterthought, how much did it help like in your Shark Tank pitch? I know that you would have obviously pitched to multiple tens of investors at least like before you went on Shark Tank. So pitching to investors, answering their tough questions wouldn't have been like a new thing to you. Doing it in front of national TV, of course, would have. Just want to understand if they saw like and the larger investment community in general sees this for a positive if you have a plan like you do, like a pathway like you do. Is social entrepreneurship considered a plus when you invest, or do you still have to work twice as hard as other startups to be able to get investments?
No, it worked twice as hard, right? I think
Mhm.
it's so in the tank it was I wasn't as scared
Mhm.
because I feel like I don't think the sharks are incentivized to destroy us. I think that wouldn't be helpful. I mean, we're not a digital gold platform or
Sure.
something like that. So I felt like, generally there's positive feelings towards that, but,
Mhm.
but they were very tough because it was the last pitch of the last day of the
Okay.
last
Mhm.
of the shoot, right? And uh, but it is tough, right? Because you don't want to compromise on your values
Sure.
and an investor and no, I mean, I'm not trying to take some things away from them. They are like, where's the ROI? So
Mm.
for me, the issue actually is not with investors as much as with impact investors. Because if you're an impact investor and then you're talking so heavily about ROI
Right.
like a typical investor, then
Mm-hmm.
what separates you from a typical investor?
Sure.
I'd rather you tell me I'm a typical investor and I want a
Mm.
5 year exit, than to like, oh, I'm an impact investor, but here's a term sheet with a 5 year exit clause on it. And
Sure.
I'm like, but then you're not, you're saying one thing and you're
Yeah.
doing something else,
Mm-hmm.
right? So then, so I think that's the difference where you, and also a lot many people, it's money, right? I don't want free money. If I wanted free money, we would do charity, right? And I think
Yeah.
we'd become a charity, and
Mm-hmm.
we, in some ways, so we are looking to give people an return, but it should be. Does it have to be like gazillion percent? Does it have to be in 5 years? Can
Mm.
it be more long term, more
Yeah.
steady? So how do you find the right investors? There is no vehicle here, and when we were going through our fundraise, like I was very tempted to kind of come up with new frameworks. I was like, look, what is the middle ground here, right? Where
Mm-hmm.
it is not a loan, where it's not a typical investment. Maybe it's an
Yeah.
investment where you are guaranteed you get you get 20% returns, and everything above that, goes back into a
The
company or goes back
company.
into a
Yeah.
different investment or something like
Mm-hmm.
that, right? And I think one day we'll try and do that. But I mean, we're not big enough. We don't have enough leverage, but we are very, very lucky to find the right investors who have joined us. It was very hard to raise, but we've got a bunch of friends and families and investors, angel investors and lead investors
Mm-hmm.
who are truly impact first, who've not only said it, but like shown it. We have no drag along exit rights. We have no 5 year, like, you have to
Okay.
exit in 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
They've been a lot more flexible with us, and I really want to give them credit, and I really want to make sure that we do their money justice, and both from an impact perspective and hopefully from a return perspective as well.
Sure. I love that answer. It's a two-way street, and I'm glad you found. I was thinking because there are companies where you can keep raising and not having to like have revenue or profit and just by your value like that you will eventually give. You can still have 18-20% of the company and then make a grand exit. But it will not work like that for you all, I'm sure, because you have a very mission that's very close to your heart that you want to keep control of. It's not going to be that you can keep handing over control to others and eventually have the company go at a different direction than you. That is just not an option for you. You have to keep at least control of like the direction that the company takes and still within that bandit work. So that
So,
was
but that's also dangerous, right? Like, if the
Mhm.
only person who's keeping the moral check is me, that's also
Mhm.
dangerous.
Sure.
How do you build a structure that, we, like, for instance, we have like clauses in our MOA, AOA that bind us to our impact. There's small things like
Mhm.
that, right? Like, we're B Corp certified now, which keeps us accountable for some things. We're trying to ingrain this in like not just in our board, in our the people who come and work here, but yeah, it's a structure that doesn't exist. So you're kind of stuck in the middle of many of different things. But anyway, sorry, go
Yeah.
on.
Has there been a time like in your journey in the last 3-4 years where you've almost like called it quits? You've thought it's not going to happen anymore. Like you've gone close to that point?
No, I don't think so, not yet.
Okay.
And I think I mean they've it's and I can say that with some confidence, but it
Hmm.
doesn't mean that it's been an easy journey. I
Sure.
think it's tough. It's really tough right now. We've had some major ups and downs and swings and things we had to do that are just like not conventional and not easy. Um, but uh, um, but yeah, I think that what matters and I think this is where all of we talked about the work you do to become an entrepreneur, the
Sure.
research and
Hmm. Hmm.
like you're not
Hmm.
only studying impact, but you're also studying social entrepreneurship. You're studying how people lead.
Yeah.
Um, like in the end, it's the motivation, right? If my
Hmm.
motivation wasn't strong, it's a good chance I might have quit at some point. Be like, "ठीक अभी क्यों यार? Why to like bust my ass on this, right? It's so hard." Like, I think your why to do what you do is really important. And if it's married to the truth, then it generally resonates and can allow you to work through things that are really tough. And then also, like, so that's the soft philosophical stuff. The
Hmm.
hard stuff, I mean, the more technical things are
Sure.
like, look, man, do you have good health? Do you have, you have a good support system? Do you have good friends? You have good family, who support you? Do you have other drama in your life that you can't, that is pulling you aside? You have, and I've been so fortunate that I don't have any of that drama. I have the most amazing support system that I can imagine, and which in fact gives me even more moral obligation to continue doing the work that I do
Of
because they
course.
get it,
Mm-hmm.
right? And they are supportive and they understand when I don't have time for them. So I think those are things that you can't ignore as well. Everybody has their non-negotiables. You might have a sick father. You might have like debt, student loans, right? You might
Mm-hmm.
not have money, you not have options. Like I don't have to worry about that.
Yeah.
And I think so. So it reduces my chances of giving up. And one of the hardest things to learn in being an entrepreneur or just building anything is that it's an unfair race. There's unfair advantages. You're not starting at the same starting point. Not even like, and even in the Olympics, you can argue that different people come from different backgrounds, but they
Yeah.
still start the 100-meter race at zero,
Yeah.
right? That is not the case for startups. Everybody comes from different backgrounds and you don't start at
Mm-hmm.
zero. Some
Mm-hmm.
some some kid's father has a factory that you can just work through. Somebody has a PhD in something. Somebody has some connection somewhere else. And my unfair advantage that was I could invest money into this, right? I could spend. I had a global. I invested $200,000, like no strings attached, and I wouldn't have like if that money goes away, if not, it's not the end of the world for me.
Mm-hmm.
And so those are all unfair advantages. And yeah, so like, how do you make the most of them to keep going? And I think one last thing I'll say is that it's underrated to not make mistakes. So what I mean by that is
Mm-hmm.
that, people almost celebrate that, oh, you went through this and then, Byju's, oh, went hit a rock bottom and then you rose from the ashes, right? What about that steady company that's just like,
Yeah.
not making as many mistakes, taking calculated risks, right? It's not as exciting as a story. You want that bad boy billionaire, or
Yeah.
somebody who's kind of got that story. And whereas what about, and so that's what very much are we putting ourselves in positions of difficulty? Like we could have over levered ourselves. Like I could have taken crazy amounts of loans, make like big
Mm-hmm.
risks, and
Mm-hmm.
then okay, maybe we've been successful. But if we fail, then it's a catastrophe. Like it's like it's catastrophe. So we're taking calculated risks that are not putting us in positions where okay that we don't implode, and there's only that much you can control. Tomorrow, like if our roof falls down, there's an earthquake and all, then we're still screwed, right? And then just despite taking all of the measures that we have taken into consideration. But yeah.
No, I totally agree. And I've thought about it a lot too. And I totally agree when you say, obviously, we don't live in a very fair system or world where everyone has like similar opportunities, access to resources or life in general. But it's heartwarming that people who do have those opportunities stop and think about sort of okay, like how do I level the playing field or how do I bring more people up to be able to have maybe not the access that I had, but at least like an access that they can live comfortable lives with. And I think if a lot more people thought that way, that we would be having a lot more of organizations like yours that try and do the good work. We're almost at time, so I'll just finish with like one last question that we have. So this is so we are a fundraising platform for nonprofits. So for and a lot of socially impacted minded young people do hopefully watch this. What would you want them to like take away? I'm sure you might also like feel like okay, like I don't want to give any advice or whatever, but just from your own learnings, your own journey, for the everyday person watching this who wants to create an impact, um, apart from contributing or supporting without in whatever they can do, that also I want them to. What can they do? How do they go about?
There's a lot of free GAN, right? And I feel like I hate that. Um, or just GAN. No, I would just say that historically, we're all different and everybody's wired differently. So, learning about yourself and pursuing truth is really important. Um, but, one of the patterns that people have found is that generally some sort of service gives you a lot of contentment. And I think that's what probably is what ending on as well is that
Mhm.
like I'm not doing this to be the hero, right? Like, oh, to get like status and power. I really think that I'm doing this for my own sanity, for my own like to like myself. I feel like it's the most selfless kind of selfishness. But that to me is true. So I think, but I feel like serving is a really good way to kind of be happy with yourself. So in whatever you do, in whatever limitations that you have, right? Everybody has their non-negotiables. I think it's worth thinking, what are you in service to? Are you service to your children, service to the society? And I think that, and number two, like there is no right or wrong way to do anything.
Mhm.
So kind of find your own paths, I guess, and I feel like the most helpful thing, even like today when we have debates at work, is like a force force function towards like, okay, what is accurate, right? Now this person is saying that, oh, there's this big like issue in the government is being unfair to this person, but like we really need to not fall into those traps and be like, what is accurate, right? Is this accurate? Are we just being biased? And I think,
Mhm.
it's so important. And I think if you go down that, it slips into a world where I think you'll find a lot more purpose. So I think that, I mean, I'd love for people to think about that as well in
Sure.
general.
Thank you. And I got the Gyan part also. Like I've seen these Instagram videos where they go to people and they're like, "What's one message you want to give to the world?" And they're like, "Be kind." And I'm like, "Great!" Like I've known that like since I was four. Like it's been drilled into me. It's not adding much, but like I'm sure that a lot of people try and look up to you in terms of what you've done, and it will leave an impression with whoever wants to be in the impact space and give an idea of how to go about things. I think that brings us to the end. Thank you so much, Anish. I think outside of this whole show, I just really personally enjoyed having this conversation with you. It's cliche, but it did light up a fire. It gave me like a little more motivation to see how much in touch with your cause or like you are still in after all these years and how meticulously you went about your journey. And when you did say like there are four things that you need help with to be able to compete with those. I think one of those, like one quote that I've always read is that like when you fight powers, you can fight it with people. And I hope like the goodwill, the brand, all the things that you ask for, that people who can afford to take pay cuts and have volunteering time that they can afford, they do give it to you and organizations like you. Thank you so much. It was a great time talking to you.
Thank you, Akash, for the great questions. I think they were very well researched and the tough, right questions to ask. And I'm really glad I got a chance to address that. So thank you for having me.
Thank you.